My name is Caroline Mays. I am 46 years old. I am a retired Navy SEAL captain with 2 decades of service, 6 classified missions, and 4 medals that I never display. But none of that mattered to my family. They didn't care who I was or what I'd done. To them, I was always the failure, the disappointment, the one they could erase without consequence. That's why I was standing there on the cold marble floor of the Mays family estate during my father's inheritance ceremony. A ceremony where my name wasn't even mentioned. I wasn't invited. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I came anyway. The room was heavy with perfume pearls and polished shoes. The air smelled of money and old lies. My mother, Evelyn, sat at the front, chin raised like a queen presiding over her kingdom. My 3 brothers, James, Richard, and Patrick, stood behind her, perfectly tailored, perfectly composed, perfectly fake. I stood alone in the back. No name tag, no seat. They thought they'd erased me, just like they'd erased my name from the new will they drafted after my father passed. They thought I would stay silent. They were wrong. Just as the family attorney finished reading the final lines, his voice smooth, rehearsed, dripping with pretense, something shifted. At first it was just the sound of footsteps, measured, precise, echoing across the marble like a heartbeat. 12 men dressed in sharp civilian suits entered through the grand doors, their movements synchronized, effortless. They parted the crowd without saying a word. The room fell into a hush so deep you could hear breath catching in throats. My family's eyes locked, frozen, speechless. The truth was about to crash over them like a tidal wave. I stood still, not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what was coming. The lead man, a tall figure with graying temples, stepped forward. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a green embroidered patch. He held it high enough for everyone to see the insignia of our old SEAL unit. A single word stitched across it: guide. That was me. That had always been me. The 12 of them lined up facing the stunned audience. Then without a word, they raised their hands in unison and saluted me, Captain Caroline Mays. The room fractured. Gasps, murmurs. My mother's fingers gripped her pearls so tightly they nearly snapped. James, my eldest brother, turned pale. His lips parted, but no sound escaped. Richard dropped his wineglass. Patrick just stared, like he finally saw me for the first time. And I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because they had already lost. The truth had arrived without me saying a single word. 12 SEALs men I had led, saved, fought beside, had come not for riches, not for politics, but for me. Their presence was the verdict. Their salute was the justice. For years my family mocked me for failing, for not being the lawyer, the surgeon, the businessman they wanted, for not marrying, for not fitting the mold. When my father died, they erased me from the inheritance as easily as deleting a name from a page. But you see, some legacies can't be rewritten. They thought they could bury me under shame and silence. Instead, they buried themselves. In that moment, under the crystal chandeliers and the hollow applause of strangers, the truth stood taller than any of them. I wasn't the lost child anymore. I was Captain Caroline Mays. And as their eyes stayed locked, frozen, breathless, I let the weight of their choices settle exactly where it belonged on them. Not on me. Never again on me. I wasn't always Captain Caroline Mays. Once I was just the girl nobody believed in. I grew up in this very house, the same house where I stood silently at the inheritance ceremony. But back then, I wasn't invisible. I was worse. I was unwanted. The Mays family was built on perfection. My father, a federal judge with a handshake that could make or break political careers. My mother, a socialite whose approval was a form of currency in our town. And my 3 brothers, each one a shining star. James, the prodigy lawyer. Richard, the brilliant surgeon. Patrick, the rising politician. And then there was me, Carolyn, the daughter who never quite fit. I wasn't graceful like my mother. I wasn't ambitious like my brothers. I wasn't even particularly rebellious. I was simply different. And in this family, different meant defective. I remember the first time it truly sank in. I must have been 12. We were sitting at the grand dining room table, white linen, silver cutlery, the smell of expensive wine, and perfectly cooked roast. I had just brought home a school project. I was proud of a mechanical model I'd built for the science fair. I was grinning, beaming, even as I held it up. My father barely glanced at it. My mother sipped her wine without a word. But James? James smiled that cold, polished smile and said the words I would never forget. You'll never amount to anything, Caroline. People like you don't finish things. You'll give up. You always do. It was said casually, almost with amusement. The others laughed. I didn't. Something inside me, something small but sharp, snapped that day. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was the slow, quiet birth of resolve. I started staying out late, not in rebellion, but in search of space, any space where I could breathe without judgment. The more they pushed, the more silent I became. And when I turned 22, I did the one thing none of them saw coming. I enlisted. I didn't tell anyone, not my mother, not my brothers, not even my friends. I packed a single duffel bag, left a short note on the kitchen counter, and vanished before sunrise. I still remember the way the house looked that morning. Lights off, windows dark, the air heavy with old furniture polish and cold marble floors. I didn't take anything but the clothes on my back and the determination in my chest. As I stepped out the front door for what I thought was the last time, I paused. And there he was, my father, standing at the top of the stairs in his old bathrobe, one hand resting on the banister. We locked eyes. For a split second, just a flicker, his usual stone expression faltered. He didn't speak. He didn't stop me. But something passed between us, something I still can't name. It wasn't love, it wasn't approval, but it wasn't hate. Maybe it was the first and only time he saw me as I was, not as the failure everyone claimed, but as someone who had already chosen her own path. And then I was gone. The first weeks in the Navy nearly broke me. The physical strain, the mental exhaustion, the endless drills, none of it came easily. But I stayed. I kept going. Every time I wanted to quit, I heard my brother's voice in my head, "You'll never amount to anything." And I kept proving him wrong, again and again. I learned to run until my legs gave out. I learned to shoot until my hands bled. I learned to lead when no one else would. And somewhere along the way, the girl who could never finish anything became the woman others followed into the darkest corners of the world. But deep down, no matter how far I went, the weight of those words never fully left me. That's what no one tells you about family scars. They heal, but they never vanish. So when I stood years later back in that house, erased from the inheritance, erased from the family, I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. Because I had already lived a lifetime outside their shadow. And I knew this time they wouldn't be the ones to define me. The truth is, I wasn't born a leader. I became 1 inch by inch, breath by breath, over years that most people will never understand. Military life doesn't reward potential. It rewards endurance. My first day at boot camp stripped me bare, not just physically, but mentally. I wasn't the strongest. I wasn't the fastest. But I learned something early that would shape everything that followed. I could suffer longer than most. And that was enough to survive. The first few months were pure attrition. Every morning before sunrise, we ran until our lungs burned and our legs failed. We were broken down, torn apart in ways you can't fully explain, only to be built back up into something harder, something sharper. I learned to push past exhaustion, past fear, past doubt. I still remember the first time someone called me sir by mistake. I didn't correct them. I wasn't offended. I just kept going. Promotion after promotion came, not because I was the best, but because I never quit. I showed up, every time. Rain, heat, sand, blood, it didn't matter. Somewhere along the way, I stopped counting the medals. I stopped caring about commendations. The people who mattered weren't the ones handing out ribbons. They were the ones who stood beside me when the bullets were real, when the plans fell apart, when it was down to instinct and grit. That's how I met them. The 12. We weren't a team by assignment. We became one by necessity. I can't tell you their real names. Not because I don't trust you, but because those names belong to another life. One we don't speak of outside secured walls. I can tell you this: we were sent on a mission that was never supposed to exist. A black operation so deep, it didn't officially happen. The kind of mission where you know going in that you might not come back. And most of us nearly didn't. We were deep in hostile territory when everything unraveled. When the intel proved false, the extraction failed, and command radioed in the 2 words you never want to hear. Abort mission. But we couldn't. Not without leaving people behind. And I, still only a lieutenant, then made the call that others wouldn't. We stayed. I led them through 5 days of chaos. No sleep, no supply lines, no backup. Just 12 soldiers running on adrenaline and whatever scraps of hope we could find in the dirt. I made mistakes, I'll admit that. I was too cautious when I should have moved faster. I pushed too hard when I should have pulled back, but we survived. Barely. I carried 2 of them on my back through the last mile of desert. I stitched one man's leg shut with my own hands under cover of night. We crossed the border bruised, broken, half-starved, but alive. When we made it back, there were no parades, no cameras, just debriefings in cold gray rooms and a classified file stamped with the words, "Never to be disclosed." But something happened in the silence that followed. One by one, each of those 12 men, without coordination, without discussion, started calling me captain even before the promotion was official. It wasn't about rank. It wasn't about protocol. It was about trust. They said I was the guide, the one who could see the path when no one else could, the one who wouldn't leave them behind no matter what. They gave me a patched dark green canvas stitched by hand. Just one word, guide. I kept it in my glove box for years. We drifted apart after that mission. Some retired, some moved to other units, some never spoke of it again. But the bond remained. We made a promise that didn't need words. If one of us ever called, the others would come, without question, without hesitation. That's how I became who I am. Not because I was chosen, but because I refused to be erased. I didn't hear about my father's death from my family. I heard it from Mrs. Jenkins, the woman who lived 3 houses down from the Mays estate. A woman who used to slip me cookies when I was a child and whisper, "You're not like them, sweetheart," when no one else was listening. She called me one cold morning. Her voice was soft, careful, the way people speak when they don't know if you'll break. "Caroline," she said, "I thought you should know. Your father passed last night." I didn't speak for several seconds. I let the silence fill the space between us, and in that space something inside me cracked, but didn't shatter. No one from my family had called. No one had written. No one had thought I deserved to know. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still in my kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug I wasn't drinking from. Grief didn't come the way I expected. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hot. It was quiet. Cold. A familiar weight pressing into my bones, the same weight I'd carried since the day I left that house behind. I didn't fly home for the funeral. I wasn't invited. In fact, I learned weeks later there wasn't much of a funeral to begin with. Just a small controlled gathering of faces that looked the part. But the real shock came later. I received a letter. Not from my family, of course, but from my father's old attorney. Someone who, for reasons I still don't fully understand, decided I deserved to see the original will. A will my father had signed 8 months before his death. A will where my name was there, clear, undeniable, not for wealth, not for properties, but for something else. He left me the Mays Foundation. It wasn't much by our family's obscene standards. Just a modest charitable fund my father had started quietly, without my mother's knowledge. Its mission was simple: to provide educational support for children of veterans, something he never cared about while he was alive, but perhaps he had tried in the end to right at least one wrong, in his own way. He had named me as its sole trustee. But when I searched public records, when I looked through legal filings and public notices, my name was nowhere, gone, erased. In its place, my eldest brother, James. I knew immediately what had happened. The will had been changed, quietly, efficiently. The new version bore none of the choices my father made in those final months. It was sanitized, polished. A document that once again kept the Mays family image intact, with me neatly written out of existence. No phone call, no explanation. They didn't even have the decency to lie to my face. And yet, I wasn't angry, not the way people expect. I felt something far colder, deeper. It was the same numb acceptance I'd felt as a child when I realized I would never be enough for them. The same dull ache I carried when I stood in uniform for the first time, knowing no letter of pride would come. It wasn't new. It was just another scar to layer on top of the old ones. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and poured myself another cup of coffee. I thought about my father, about the man he was, the man he tried to be too late. I thought about the last time I saw him standing on the staircase as I left for the Navy. The look in his eyes, not hate, not love, but something human. Something fractured. In that moment, I understood something that would carry me through what came next. Some battles are never meant to be won. Some are only meant to be survived. I wasn't going to fight them in court. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion. I had spent my life being erased. But this time I would write the ending, on my terms. People ask me sometimes when they hear pieces of the story why I didn't sue. Why I didn't fight for what was mine in court. Why I didn't expose them, drag their polished names through the dirt the way they tried to bury me. And the answer is simple. I wasn't raised to believe in justice through noise. I was raised to believe that some fights are won, not by shouting, but by standing still, when the world demands you kneel. So I didn't sue. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't even tell my closest friends. Instead, I went back to work. Every morning, I rose before the sun laced my boots and stepped onto the training field, where I taught the next generation of military minds, civilians, veterans, young soldiers, how to read maps that would one day save their lives, how to move through darkness without being seen, how to stay alive when the plan falls apart. That work, it saved me in more ways than I can explain. I poured everything into it, my focus, my discipline, my need to matter somewhere somehow. And at night when the house was quiet, when the memories pressed too close, I would open the drawer in my bedside table and pull out the only token I kept from the life I left behind. A small worn patch, dark green canvas, faded stitching, one simple word embroidered across the center guide. It wasn't official. It wasn't sanctioned. It was a gift, a private badge of honor given to me by 12 soldiers who once trusted me with their lives. 12 men who survived because I didn't walk away when the odds turned against us. I kept that patch not because I needed the reminder, but because sometimes on the hardest nights, I needed to feel that something I did still mattered, that I wasn't entirely invisible, that even if the people who shared my blood had chosen to erase me, there were others who remembered. And yet, even as I clung to that, another question haunted me. Was forgiveness necessary? Was it possible? For years the idea of forgiveness had been fed to me like medicine. My mother's Sunday sermons, my father's cold lectures about appearances and respectability. The world around me taught that to forgive was to heal, but I never bought into it. Not completely. The truth is, forgiveness isn't always healing. Sometimes it's just another form of surrender, another way to silence yourself for the comfort of others. And I'd spent too long being silent. So no, I didn't forgive. But I didn't hate them either. I chose something different. I chose distance. I chose to build a life in the spaces they never touched, in classrooms, in training fields, in conversations with young soldiers who didn't care about my last name, only about the knowledge I could pass on. I learned to find joy in small things. The way the morning light fell across the asphalt. The steady rhythm of breath and footsteps during a training run. The quiet satisfaction of teaching someone how to survive, how to truly survive, not just in combat, but in life. That became enough for me, for a while. But deep down, even in those moments, I knew the story wasn't finished. I knew sooner or later the past would come calling, and when it did, I wouldn't be able to hide behind silence. The question wasn't whether the reckoning would come. The question was, when it did, who would I choose to be? Would I become like them, bitter, vengeful, small? Or would I find a way to rise above without disappearing again? That thought lived in the back of my mind every time I touched the guide patch, every time I traced the stitching with my thumb. It wasn't about medals, it wasn't about revenge, it was about dignity. It was about standing my ground, not because anyone handed me permission, but because I had earned the right to exist fully and visibly on my own terms. I didn't know then how close that choice was, how soon the call would come, but I felt it. Somewhere deep in my bones, the quiet before the storm, the weight of something inevitable, and when it came, I would be ready. The call came on a Wednesday. I remember because I had just finished teaching a navigation course at the training center. My boots were still dusty, my hands still stained with engine grease from the broken-down Jeep I'd fixed the night before. The number on the screen wasn't saved in my contacts, but I answered anyway. Old habits die hard. There was a brief pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade, gravelly, low, familiar in the way only battlefield voices can be. Captain Mays. I froze. The name hit me square in the chest. No one called me that anymore, not here, not in the quiet life I'd built. "Who is this?" I asked softly, though I already knew. "Hartley," he said. "From Foxtrot 6. I sat down without meaning to. My legs just gave way. I hadn't heard his name since the mission that nearly killed us all. Since the day I carried him across sand, while bullets cracked the air above us. Since the day he gave me that patch and called me guide. We exchanged no small talk. Men like Hartley don't call for casual reasons. "I'm sorry to bring this to you," he said, his voice steady. But we heard. Heard what I asked, though, something in me already braced for it. "About your father, about the will, about the ceremony. Word gets around." I didn't reply. "It wasn't in the papers," he continued. "We heard through Tucker. Remember him? He's back in your old town, runs a security firm now. He caught wind of it." I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes. Of course it had made its way back to them. Of course the whispers that had followed me all my life would eventually circle back to the only men who never once looked at me like I was less. "We just wanted you to know," Hartley said, pausing like the next words mattered more than the breath in his lungs. "We're here." I stayed silent. "Look, Captain," he said, voice softening. "You saved us. You led us when no one else would. We came back alive because you refused to leave us. We've never forgotten that. And we won't stand by while they erase you." My throat tightened. Not from emotion, at least not the kind people write in movies, but from something deeper. Something bone deep. The kind of loyalty that time and distance can't kill. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. My voice flat but honest. "That's not who I am." "We know," he replied gently. "We're not offering revenge. We're offering presence." The word hit harder than I expected. Presence. I realized then how long I had been alone. How many years had passed since anyone had stood beside me without an agenda, without pretense. I ran my thumb along the edge of the guide patch in my pocket. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but somehow my fingers found it like muscle memory. "I don't need to be saved," I murmured. "No," Hartley agreed. "But sometimes people need to witness the truth, even if the truth makes them uncomfortable." I thought of my family, of their polished smiles, their polite cruelty. The way they could stand on a stage and rewrite history without blinking. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't need their apology. But I needed the truth to stand, to breathe, to exist in the open if only once. And for the first time in years, I allowed the possibility that maybe I didn't have to carry the weight of that alone. When I asked quietly, 2 weeks, he said, "We'll be there." We didn't say goodbye. There was no need. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. The house around me silent, the afternoon sun catching dust in the air. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. But I was done letting other people write my story. And when the time came, I would walk into that ceremony, not with the intention to destroy, but with the intention to reveal. To let the truth speak for itself, no matter what it cost. 2 weeks later, I came back to the town that never quite let me go. I didn't call ahead. I didn't send word. I didn't need to. In places like this, news travels faster than footsteps. I drove myself. Same old truck, same worn boots, no uniform, no insignia, just me. The streets looked almost identical to the day I left years ago. Maple trees casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks, the same brick storefronts lining Main Street. The same lazy afternoon quiet that made time feel slower here. But it wasn't the place that had changed. It was me. I pulled up outside the old diner on Hawthorne Avenue, the kind of place where I'd once poured coffee for minimum wage while studying mechanics at night. I sat there in the parking lot for a moment, engine idling, watching people come and go. No one noticed me at first. That's the thing about small towns, they remember everything, but they pretend to forget. They carry stories like stones in their pockets, too heavy to throw away, but too inconvenient to hold in the open. I stepped out of the truck, adjusting the collar of my jacket. The wind was sharp, the air tinged with the faint smell of pine and old wood smoke. The first face I recognized was Mr. Davis, the former postmaster, now clearly retired, leaning on a cane as he crossed the street. His eyes flickered toward me, narrowed slightly, then moved on. "Pretend you don't see. Pretend you don't remember." I kept walking. At the corner, 2 women I vaguely recognized from my school days stood outside the florist's, deep in conversation. One of them, the taller one, caught sight of me mid-sentence. Her words stumbled. Her hand paused mid-air. For a second, her eyes locked on mine, and I knew she remembered. I could almost hear the wheels turning behind her polite, strained smile. Is that her? Is that Caroline? Didn't she leave? Didn't she fail? Didn't her family? I gave her a single nod. Small, controlled. The kind of acknowledgement you offer to people who once looked through you. She said nothing. I said nothing. I passed by the bakery, the pharmacy, the law offices, each one a postcard from a life I'd abandoned. Some of the storefronts had changed, but most hadn't. This town doesn't change. It endures, it swallows, it buries. I stopped by the park where I used to sit on the swings as a girl, back when I still believed there was space for me in this place. The park was empty now, just the wind in the trees, and the distant sound of a church bell marking the hour. I thought of my father, of the man who had, in his own broken way, tried to make something right before it was too late. I thought of my brothers, the polished lies they would tell, the curated smiles they would wear, the ceremony they would perform without ever once acknowledging the fracture beneath their feet. And I thought of the 12 men who were already somewhere nearby. Men who had no stake in this town, no reason to come, except me, except loyalty, except the weight of things that matter. I took a breath, slow and steady. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't afraid, but I was aware that this place still held power, aware that the ghosts here were not the kind you see, but the kind you carry. By the time I reached the steps of the old city hall, the sun had dipped low enough to cast the streets in gold. I paused at the threshold, one hand resting on the iron rail, and I let myself feel it just for a moment, the pull of old stories, old wounds, old selves. Then I stepped forward, one foot, then the next. I wasn't here for war. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to be seen, whether they liked it or not. I don't know why I agreed to dinner. Maybe some part of me, the part I thought I'd buried, still wanted to look them in the eye, still wanted to hear the words out loud instead of reading them between the lines. The dining room looked exactly the same. The chandelier, the long oak table, the fine china that only came out for company. Even the air felt unchanged, heavy with old money and older secrets. My mother sat at the head of the table, her posture flawless, as always, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore pearl earrings I hadn't seen since I was a child. She didn't rise when I entered. She didn't smile. James, my eldest brother, was already seated, sipping from a glass of wine, his expression as polished as his shoes. The only sound for a long moment was the clink of silverware on porcelain as the staff laid down the final dishes. Then my mother spoke. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to cut glass. "You chose to leave, Carolyn," she said, without looking at me. "You don't have the right to return and make demands." I pulled out the chair furthest from them and sat. My hand stayed in my lap, my face blank. "I didn't come to make demands," I said quietly. "I came to tell the truth." James gave a small laugh, one of those dry, condescending sounds that made my skin itch. "Truth," he echoed. "What truth exactly?" "That you abandoned this family, that you threw away every opportunity you were given." His words didn't sting the way they once did. I'd built scar tissue thick enough for that. I held his gaze, calm, unblinking. "I didn't abandon anything," I said evenly. "I chose a different path." James set his wine down with a deliberate click. "You chose to humiliate this family. Every time your name comes up, do you know what people say? They ask about the black sheep, the daughter who never amounted to anything, who couldn't hack it in school, who ran away to play soldier." I said nothing. The words weren't new. They'd been rehearsed for years. My mother lifted her glass, took a small sip, then finally met my eyes. "There are certain expectations when you carry the May's name," she murmured. "Expectations you never cared to meet." The weight of those words settled into the room like dust. Heavy, suffocating. I breathed slowly, counting in my head like I'd learned to do under fire. 1, 2, 3. When I spoke again, my voice was still soft. Dad didn't see it that way. That got their attention. James stiffened. My mother's eyes narrowed just slightly. I placed both hands on the table fingers, resting lightly against the wood. "He left me the foundation for a reason," I continued. "Because he knew I would use it for something real, not for appearances, not for legacy." My mother's lips thinned. That document has no legal standing. I nodded once, maybe, but it speaks louder than anything written on paper. Silence stretched. The clink of a spoon, the crackle of a candle. And then James leaned back, arms crossed, his smile cold. "You're not a Mays," he said, the words deliberate. "You're a mistake we don't speak of. You left. You stayed gone. You don't belong here." Something in my chest tightened, not from hurt but from memory. From every childhood dinner where I'd been invisible. From every family photo where I stood just slightly apart. I let the words sit. I didn't flinch. And then very calmly I said the only thing I needed to. I never belonged here. I rose from the table, steady and unhurried. My mother said nothing. James didn't move. I walked out without slamming the door, without raising my voice. Because sometimes power isn't in what you say. It's in what you refuse to carry any longer. And I had carried their weight long enough. As I stepped away from the table, I caught sight of him. Patrick, the middle brother, the quiet one. He hadn't spoken during the dinner, not once. He hadn't defended me, but he hadn't joined the attack either. He'd sat there, hands folded, expression unreadable, his eyes flicking between me and the others, like he was watching a chess game he didn't want to play. And for just a second, barely more than a breath, our eyes met. Something shifted. It wasn't pity. It wasn't approval. It was hesitation. Patrick had always been different from James. Where James was sharp edges and cruel precision, Patrick was softer, more careful with his words. Growing up, he was the one who read books in corners, who avoided conflict, who stayed quiet even when the others mocked me. But he also never intervened, never stopped them, never stood between me and the sharp teeth of family tradition. As I moved past him that night, he didn't look away. He held my gaze. Something passed between us, an unspoken weight neither of us named. And in that moment, I saw it. The fracture, the crack beneath the polished surface, the doubt. I didn't stop walking. I didn't say a word. But I carried that look with me as I stepped back into the night air. Because even the smallest hesitation, even the quietest doubt, can be the beginning of something. I didn't know then if Patrick would ever find the courage to stand on the right side of this story. But I knew deep down that he wasn't like the others. Not completely, and sometimes it's the ones who say the least who end up saying the most when it matters. The wind picked up as I reached the sidewalk. My hand brushed against the patch in my pocket. Guide. The reminder of who I had become. And somewhere behind me in the windows of that old house, I knew at least one pair of eyes was still watching, still questioning, still not finished. The inheritance ceremony was held in the grand hall of the Mays Foundation building. A structure funded, designed, and named for the very man whose legacy they were now rewriting. I arrived alone. No one greeted me at the door. No usher offered me a program. I was just another face in the crowd, unacknowledged, uninvited, unseen. And yet, I was more present than any of them. They had reserved seats for donors, board members, local politicians. The first 3 rows were filled with faces that meant nothing to me. People who had never known my father, not really. And then there was my family. My mother sat in the front row, draped in navy silk diamonds, catching the light. James stood beside the podium, perfectly rehearsed. Richard, ever the surgeon, adjusted his cufflinks with mechanical precision. Patrick sat further down, still silent, still unreadable. I was placed in the back. They didn't need to say it out loud. The message was clear in every deliberate omission. Every polite half-smile from the staff I didn't belong. I sat quietly, hands folded, eyes steady on the stage. My breathing slow, my heart calm. This was not new. This was who they had always been. James stepped up to the microphone first. He spoke of family values, of tradition, of the importance of giving back a legacy, he called it, that stretched through generations of the Mays name. I almost laughed. His voice was smooth, rich, with artificial warmth. He told stories that never happened. Painted my father as a visionary, a community leader, a man of unwavering principles. Not once did he mention the truth. Not once did he mention the Foundation's original purpose. My father's quiet wish to serve the children of veterans, to honor lives like mine. I felt no anger, just that familiar cold detachment. I watched my mother dab her eyes delicately with a handkerchief, the perfect performance. The audience murmured their approval, their soft claps polite and oblivious. When the new trustee announcement came, there was no surprise. James again. Of course. The papers had already been signed. The ceremony was nothing but formality, a chance to display control. To rewrite the narrative, I sat there in the last row, anonymous, stripped of name, of blood, of place. But I wasn't small. I wasn't broken. I was awake. My fingers brushed the patch in my pocket without thinking. Guide. The weight of it grounded me sharp against the soft fabric of my coat. I thought of the years they erased me, the holidays where my name wasn't spoken, the letters that never came, the birthdays where I was nothing more than a distant echo they politely ignored. And yet here I was, still standing, still breathing. The speaker shifted to my mother next. She rose gracefully, her voice honeyed and thin. She spoke of sacrifice, of unity, of the importance of family. And I, sitting among strangers, the child she pretended not to have let out the smallest breath of a laugh. It was involuntary, soft, but real, because the absurdity of it was too much. Sacrifice, unity, family. She hadn't once called me since my father died. She hadn't asked where I was. She hadn't even bothered to send a copy of the new will. I found out through whispers. And yet here she stood, draped in wealth, hands clasped over a heart I wasn't sure she still possessed, and she spoke as if these words belonged to her. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt, because some lies collapse under the weight of their own repetition. When the applause came, I stayed seated. I didn't clap. I didn't rise. I remained still, letting the sound wash over me like distant thunder. They could have their ceremony. They could have their curated narrative. But I knew something they didn't. I knew what was coming. I knew I wasn't alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to fight for their recognition, because I already had something far stronger. I had the truth. And soon, so would everyone else. It happened without warning. One moment the audience was clapping politely, the sound a hollow shell around carefully chosen words. The next, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall creaked open, slow, deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. The applause faltered. The air shifted. 12 men entered. They moved in perfect unison. Measured steps, crisp suits, eyes forward. The weight of their presence hit the room like a silent detonation. No one spoke. No one moved. I felt my breath catch, not in fear, not in surprise, but in something deeper. Recognition, reverence. They hadn't told me they were coming. I hadn't asked them to. But they were here, 12 soldiers. 12 men I had once led through a mission none of us were supposed to survive. Men I hadn't seen in years, who owed me nothing except the quiet, unspoken bond forged in fire and loss. The sound of their footsteps filled the hall, steady, rhythmic, unhurried, as they moved down the central aisle. Faces turned. Whispers rose in hushed confusion. My mother stiffened in her seat. James froze mid-sentence at the podium. Even Patrick, seated off to the side, looked up sharply, something unfamiliar flickering behind his eyes. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still as the 12 reached the front of the hall, forming a single line between the stage and the audience. Their hands clasped behind their backs, their expressions calm but unyielding. The lead man, Hartley, stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was low but carried effortlessly to the furthest corner of the room. "We're sorry to interrupt," he began, his eyes sweeping briefly over the audience, then resting on the faces seated at the front. "But we couldn't let this moment pass without speaking the truth." James found his voice first. "Excuse me," he stammered, his composure cracking. Who are you? What is the meaning of this?" Hartley didn't flinch. "We're here," he said steadily, "to correct the record." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, familiar. A patch, dark green canvas, the same as mine. He held it up for all to see. "One word," he said softly. "Guide." The room held its breath. "This woman," he continued, turning slightly to gesture toward me, "is not the person you've tried to erase. She is the reason 12 men stand here today alive. She led us. She carried us. She refused to leave us behind when the odds were impossible." His voice didn't rise. He didn't need to shout. He was stating facts, undeniable. "We came here," Hartley said, "because she is more than the daughter you ignored, more than the soldier you dismissed. She is our captain, and to us she will always be the legacy that matters." A ripple moved through the room. Small gasps, shifts in posture. The kind of discomfort that comes when carefully built illusions start to crack. I sat motionless. I felt the weight of every eye on me, some confused, some curious, some ashamed. I didn't lower my gaze. I didn't look away. For once I let the truth stand without stepping forward to defend it. Hartley lowered the patch, then in perfect unison, all 12 men raised their right hands and saluted. The breath seemed to leave the room. Even my mother, ever composed, ever cold, looked pale. Her hands tightened around her clutch, the mask of indifference slipping just slightly. James said nothing. Patrick's eyes stayed on me. Not the men. Me. And something shifted. Something I couldn't name yet but felt. The salute held for 3 full seconds. Then wordlessly, the men lowered their hands and stepped back. No fanfare, no theatrics, just quiet presence, unshakable. The ceremony, such as it was broken, the facade fractured. And as the silence stretched, I let the smallest smile touch the corner of my mouth. Not one of triumph, not one of revenge, but one of something far rarer. Vindication. They could take my name off a will. They could write me out of photographs, but they couldn't rewrite this, not anymore. For a moment the room didn't move. The 12 seals lowered their hands, stepping back into quiet formation. The ceremony was broken, fractured by the weight of something none of them had expected: the truth. Then the reactions began. It started small. A single clap, soft, hesitant. Someone, an older man in the 3rd row, rose to his feet, his hands coming together. Another followed. A ripple, uncertain but growing. But not everyone clapped. Some sat frozen, their faces locked in polite confusion, their eyes darting between the stage and the soldiers. A few shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, arms crossed, expressions tight with disapproval. And some didn't move at all. My mother. Her hands stayed perfectly still on her lap. Her chin lifted, her eyes glassy but unblinking. The same cold perfection I'd known all my life. Even now, even with the truth laid bare before her, she refused to shift. James, my eldest brother, was another story. I saw the fury beneath the surface, the tight jaw, the clenched fists, the desperate need to regain control, to restore the narrative, to push me back into the silence where he thought I belonged. But he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. And then there was Patrick. He hadn't spoken during the ceremony. He hadn't stood with the others. But in that long stretched silence, I saw it. His eyes lowered. For the first time, he didn't meet my gaze. He didn't look at the crowd. He stared down at his hands, at the floor, as if something had cracked deep inside. And I knew. He wasn't proud of me. Not yet. But he was ashamed of them. That was the beginning. The murmurs rose. Some whispered. Some applauded. Some sat stiff, their faces masks of confusion, discomfort, disbelief. The hall became a collage of divided reactions. No one quite knew what to do. I remained in my seat. I didn't rise. I let the chaos unfold without moving a muscle. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is simply stay. To hold your ground when the world wants you to disappear. I breathed. Slow, steady. The weight of the moment settled over me, not heavy but strangely light. And for the first time I felt it in my bones. I wasn't the one who was lost. They were. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat awkwardly, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with the microphone. Perhaps Miss Mays would like to say a few words. He offered, his voice thin, brittle, with discomfort. Heads turned. Eyes shifted. I felt the weight of the room pivot toward me. I rose slowly. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need to. I stepped forward, measured, unhurried, until I stood at the edge of the front row facing them. My mother, James, Patrick, the audience of strangers. And then I spoke. My voice was soft, but it carried. Years of command training made sure of that. I'm not here to take anything from you, I said. I'm not here for money, or titles, or apologies. My hands stayed at my sides. I'm here because the truth matters, I continued. Because some stories deserve to be heard even when they're inconvenient, even when they're uncomfortable. The hall was silent. I let the stillness settle before I spoke again. I don't need a seat in your will, I said, my eyes steady on my mother. I don't need a place at your table. All I've ever wanted then and now is for you to see me. I let the words breathe. To see me as I am. Not as you wish I were. Not as you pretend I never existed. Just as I am. For a moment, no one moved. And then from somewhere in the middle rows, a small voice broke the silence. Who is she, Mommy? A child. A boy. No older than 6. His voice was curious, pure, in the way only children can be. The mother beside him hesitated. Then softly she answered. She's who we should all try to be. The words settled over the hall like a whisper of wind. Something shifted. Somewhere in the back, a woman stood slowly, placing one hand over her heart. Another followed. Then another. Not everyone, not all, but enough. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I simply nodded once and stepped back. The ceremony, if it could still be called that, continued without me, but the balance had already shifted. The story had changed. And when I sat down again, I felt the faintest brush of warmth in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not victory, not revenge, something gentler, a kind of peace. The child in the audience looked back once more, his small face bright with curiosity. And I thought, let that be the legacy, not the lies, not the wealth, but the quiet courage to stand when it matters, even if you stand alone. I left the ceremony the same way I arrived, quietly. No one stopped me. No one called my name. The applause had faded into uneasy murmurs, the crowd splintering into awkward conversations and forced smiles. But none of it mattered. The weight I had carried for years, the need to be seen, to be acknowledged by people who had always refused me, was gone. I didn't need their validation anymore. The cold evening air greeted me as I stepped outside. The sky had shifted to deep indigo, and the wind carried the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing steady still. Then they appeared. The 12. Hartley and the others standing in quiet formation beneath the soft glow of the street lamps. No words, just presence, the same way they'd always stood shoulder to shoulder, unshaken. As I reached them, each man straightened, then raised a hand in one final salute. 12 hands, 12 lives, 12 silent tributes. I returned the gesture, not formally, not with ceremony, but with the simple, deliberate touch of my hand to my heart over the place where the patch still lay beneath my jacket. They held their salute for a breath longer. Then they lowered their hands and quietly stepped aside. No goodbyes, no fanfare, just the quiet respect of those who understand that some moments speak louder in silence. As I moved past them, I caught movement to my right. Patrick. He wasn't part of the formation. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he would turn away, if he would let the moment slip past like so many others before it. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward just enough to meet me where I paused. Our eyes met. And he said the only words I think he could manage. I was wrong. Simple. Unadorned. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. I didn't need more than that. We both knew too much had been said without words for too many years. Some things couldn't be fixed. Some scars would never fade. But acknowledgement, even the smallest acknowledgement, matters. I left him standing there and walked on, towards something new, towards something mine. It took less than 6 months to set the foundation right. I didn't have to fight publicly. I didn't have to call reporters or light fires in courtrooms. The law, when followed properly and quietly, tends to speak for itself. The original will, the one my father had signed, was verified. The Mays Foundation was restored to its intended purpose. No headlines, no family meetings. Just a quiet letter from a firm downtown confirming what I already knew. The truth had found its way through, but I didn't take the money for myself. Instead, I used it to build something new. The center opened on a cold autumn morning in a converted warehouse on the edge of town. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no photographers. Just a simple wooden sign above the door, the Guide Center. Inside, we built what mattered, a space for veterans to find community for teenagers. To learn trades for people who had been told they were less, to discover they were always more. I didn't give speeches, I didn't put my name on the wall. But I hung one thing right above the entrance to the workshop. The patch, the same dark green canvas with the word Guide stitched across it. And below it in smaller letters, One final edition Captain Maze. No gold frames, no spotlights, just quiet presence. I spent my days teaching kids how to fix engines, how to build something with their hands, how to solve problems without waiting for permission. I taught veterans how to transition, how to carry the weight of service into civilian life without drowning under it. Some days were quiet, some days were hard, but every day felt real. And somewhere in the rhythm of those hours, something in me healed. I still carried the scars, I still heard echoes of old voices in the back of my mind. But I no longer let them steer me. One afternoon, as I was helping a teenage boy rebuild a rusted carburetor, he looked up and asked without pretense, without judgment, "Were you really a captain?" I smiled, wiping grease from my hands. "Yeah," I said softly, "I was." He grinned, nodding like it made perfect sense, like it fit. And in that small, unguarded moment, I realized the truth I'd chased my whole life had been here all along. It was never about titles, never about inheritance. It was about building something that lasts beyond you, something that leaves people better than you found them. And that was a legacy no one could take away. I sit on the front steps of my house most evenings, nothing fancy, just an old porch, a rusted chair, and the same beat-up truck I've driven since before my hair started turning silver at the edges. The sun dips low, setting fire to the sky, and the air smells like dust engine oil and pine. That's when I think about everything. About the journey that brought me here. About the weight I carried for so long. About the truth I finally stopped running from. I never imagined my life would end up this way. When I was young, all I wanted was to belong, to fit into the shape my family carved for me. I bent myself into knots, trying to be what they needed, what they expected. And when I couldn't, when I finally stepped away, I thought I was walking into nothing. I thought I was alone. But the truth is, family isn't where you're born. Family isn't blood or names on legal documents. It's not the last name you carry or the legacy others try to hand you. Family is who stands with you when you have nothing left to give. Family is who shows up without being asked. Family is who you choose. That's the lesson I learned. That's the truth I came to live by. I built a life outside their shadows. I built a community where scars weren't something to hide, but something to honor. I built a place where kids who didn't fit the mold could find their footing, where veterans who felt invisible could be seen. And more than anything, I built myself, not into what they wanted, but into who I was always meant to be. I still carry the patch. I still remember the weight of that final salute. But these days, I find peace in smaller things. The hum of a well-tuned engine, the laughter of a child learning something new, the simple act of waking up without regret. I've lived, and I'll keep living on my terms, in my own way. And no one, no name, no lie, no omission can take that from me. Most afternoons you can find me in the workshop. There's always something that needs fixing: an old carburetor, a loose belt, a clutch that just won't catch. Today it's a boy, 12, maybe 13. All elbows and nerves. He reminds me of someone I used to know, someone who once sat at the back of the room, always second-guessing, always wondering if they'd ever be enough. His hands shake as he tries to loosen a bolt. I kneel beside him, guiding his fingers. "Take your time," I say softly. "There's no rush." He frowns. "I'm not good at this." I smile, wiping grease from my palms. "You don't have to be good today. You just have to try." He glances at me, uncertainty in his eyes. "But what if I mess it up?" I hold his gaze. "Kid," I say gently, "no one, not a single person, has the right to tell you what you can or can't do. Not me, not your parents, not anyone." I let the words settle. Fixing things, I continue, starts with believing you can. His hands steady. Little by little, the bolt turns. I don't need to say more, because the truth, real truth, doesn't come from speeches. It comes from presence, from showing up, from quiet moments like this. When he finishes, he looks up at me, grinning. I nod. "Told you." And for a heartbeat, the weight I carried all those years feels lighter. When the day ends and the tools are put away, I return to the house. There's a letter waiting for me, no return address. Handwritten, careful. I know who it's from before I even open it. My mother's handwriting is unmistakable. I sit down, fingers tracing the edges of the envelope. For a long moment, I consider not opening it, leaving it sealed, untouched. But in the end, I do. The letter is short, No apology, no explanation. Just 3 words: you are blood. I fold the paper slowly. I don't cry. I don't rage. I tuck it into the bottom of an old wooden box, the one where I keep fragments of the life I left behind, photos, medals, the original patch. Some things need to be put away, not forgotten, but released. I step outside again. The sky is wide, open. The wind is soft against my face. And I think to myself, this is it. This is what freedom feels like. They can erase me from their photographs. They can rewrite their stories. But they cannot erase me from myself. And in the end, that's enough. That will always be enough. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hands, the sun just beginning to rise? Or is it late at night when the world feels still and stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of something more, a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, whatever chapter you're living through, I hope you carry this story with you. I hope you remember sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes it waits, quietly, patiently, until you're ready to open your heart. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story. Description: what happens when a forgotten soldier erased from her family's legacy decides to reclaim her place? Not through revenge, but through quiet strength. This is the powerful story of Carolyn Mays, a decorated military captain betrayed by her own bloodline, disowned from her inheritance, and silenced at the very ceremony meant to celebrate her father's life. But when 12 Navy SEALs from her past step forward to rewrite the truth, everything changes. This isn't just another revenge story. It's about dignity, resilience, and the quiet revolution of choosing to live on your own terms. If you love stories of military courage, emotional transformation, and smart, dignified payback, this one will stay with you long after the screen fades. Watch now and discover why sometimes the best revenge is becoming untouchable. Thank you so much for watching and supporting Revenge. Dismantled pinned comment: how would you rate Caroline May's story from 0 to 10? Drop your score below. We read every single one. Also, where are you watching from? Let's build a global community of people who believe in kindness, resilience, and second chances. Comment your location. We'd love to know. And don't forget to subscribe and share this story with your friends. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and motivates us to create more inspiring stories like this one. Thank you for being part of Revenge Dismantled, where stories of quiet strength and dignity always find a voice.